Is this inevitable? Is Taiwan inevitable in terms of them going out and trying to attack
other communities that are nearby? In northern Mexico, there are no other communities. So pros and cons. The pro is that there's usually just a handful of families who run the entire metro, and that metro stops at the edge of the desert, and that's it. Now, that means that as an American, you can go south with your needs, find out who's in charge, make friends, and you will probably leave in a few days with a series of supply contracts because they represent the power board, the mayor's office, the tax office, the university, the local labor unit. It's all in one little package. It's very oligarchic. We don't like that here, but wow, is it easy to interface with when you want to do business. You'll leave with those deals, probably a godchild and absolutely a splitting hangover, because you're part of the family now. And the Texans have been doing this for 30 years. But once you've gobbled up all the labor for each metro, you're done. The Mexicans aren't mobile like we are because they don't have those secondary communities in the north. Well, there's only 130 million Mexicans. About a quarter of those are in the northern states that we have the most experience with. And I would argue that the Texans have already gobbled up about 70 to 75% of that labor. So there's a limited window for everyone else to get in on northern Mexico where the logistics are simpler, where the politics are simpler. Once that is gobbled up, and at the rate we're going, that's in less than 2 or 3 years, we then have to go into central Mexico, which is a much different environment. And now you're dealing with people like AMLO. Now you're dealing with not so much oligarchs, but a more connected community that has its own weight. It's not that that can't be productive. It's wildly productive, but it's a much more complicated launch process that requires a lot more negotiation, a lot more government involvement.
Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from the Golden Banner Trail above Ken Carl, which is a suburb of the Denver Metroplex. Today we're going to talk about water, specifically all the water that northern China has gotten of late. They had heavy spring and summer rains, and they just got hit by a typhoon, and so there's significant flooding through Beijing. It's already killed a few dozen people. The key thing to remember about China is a lot of its government structures are a direct outcome of its geography. So the North China Plain, where the Han ethnicity basically has its core of power, is a big wide open area that is both drought and flood prone. The drought is normal climatic stuff. This is a semi-arid region, maybe roughly akin to a cooler version of central Texas or maybe central Nebraska. But instead of having kind of braided rivers that flow through it, it's got one single mighty river, the Yellow, that originates significantly upstream, a couple thousand miles away, that drains an absolutely massive watershed at an area that is a soil type called the loess, which is wind-driven soils, very fine particulates. And that means when this dry zone, a lot of it's actually desert, does get rain, most of it runs off, it carries a lot of silt with it, and that's why the Yellow River has its name. The silt is yellow. By the time you get downstream to where everyone lives in the North China Plain, it's a raging torrent, but it's a raging torrent with lots and lots and lots of sediment. Now, if you can capture that sentiment and kind of like the flood dry that you had in, say, Egypt or the American Midwest, you get incredibly productive farmland. But that requires you growing things like corn and wheat and the rest. China's a rice country. Water management's very important. Rice has to have very specific watering conditions at every stage of its production, otherwise the crop is lost. Now, northern China, they don't grow rice anymore, but after 2,500 years of growing rice, that has set certain things into motion. Specifically, they have to be able to control the river, otherwise the water will come or be not there at the time of its choosing, rather than the Chinese people's choosing. And that requires a lot more organization at the state level, which tends to generate a stronger hand in terms of government, and a requirement that you have everybody under a single house politically. Otherwise, various factions will just attack the waterworks and destroy whatever the hostile power happens to be. Fast forward that 2,500 years. Wrestling the river into shape means basically building ginormous dikes down the entirety of its length for the entirety of civilized northern China. That means the silt has nowhere to go. So in the Midwest, one of the problems that we've seen after just 150 years of trying to do this strategy on the Mississippi is you get silt on the bottom of the riverbed that raises the level of the water so that when one of those dikes does break, it floods an entire area. So a big thing that the Army Corps of Engineers have been doing over the last decade is leveling some of those dikes and returning some of the land to wetlands just to absorb the flood flows. This is at least 2 orders of magnitude more significant in the case of China because you're talking about the most dense human population footprint in the country. And we're going to rotate a little so you can see why I like this so much. See that? See that over there? There. That is Red Rocks Amphitheater. So if you ever want to see a good show in Denver, go there. I got a great view of downtown as the sun sets. Anyway, what this means now is that in China, you've got 2.5 millennia of sediment. And so every time there's a flood, it threatens the entire dike system. And if you have a break somewhere, it's a much bigger of a problem than you have in the Mississippi, because after 2.5 millennia of heavy sediment, the floor of the river in many cases now above the ground level of the surrounding lands, meaning that those dikes are 2, maybe even 3 stories above the cities. And if they break, the entire course of the river, river goes by the path of least resistance, crashes down into the populated zones. Now, that hasn't happened this year. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm saying that the Chinese really didn't finish their dike system to the current level of absurdity until just about 10, 15 years ago. They used to have floods regularly. They would kill hundreds, if not thousands of people. And in today's environment where the Chinese are facing every possible problem under the sun with their finance, their economy, and their demographics, this is just one more thing you have to factor in, because when this breaks, and physics tells us in time it will, they're going to lose significant portions of some of their most advanced infrastructure, not to mention lots and lots and lots of people. So whenever you see it raining west of Beijing, pay attention, because it matters a very great deal.